hunting firm Hoopers were busy trying to track down heirs to the £120,000 estate of Stella Evans. When Stella died, she was living in retirement housing at the Queen Mother Court in Rochester. Manager Barbara Ponter knew Stella for almost 25 years.
Stella was a very private lady, very smart. She didn't tend to change any of her dresses or the way she dressed. It was always the same style.
Stella had been a successful accountant, and her love for numbers rolled over into her home life.
Stella used to like going into the bingo in the main lounge. She was quite a lucky lady. She would win most Fridays at bingo, and also as well she would quietly work out how much the winnings would be, because by how many people were in there and how much they'd taken, so she would work it out before anybody else.
She thoroughly enjoyed it, and she often won, and she liked, I think, a little gamble.
She knew everybody that was in the lottery, and also that she knew their numbers, and she always knew who won what.
When Stella actually passed away, we went into her flat and we actually found an old passport that she had. So she was obviously well travelled, because when you actually look at the passport, in 1956 we went to Germany, and a couple of years later she visited Austria and Italy, Belgium, etc. So she obviously liked to travel, which is nothing she ever told us about, but she didn't change either.
Stella had lived at the Queen Mother Court since it opened in 1979. It belonged to the Royal British Legion, who had built it especially for retired servicemen and women. During the Second World War, Stella joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, better known as the ATS. The ATS was the women's branch of the British Army and was formed in 1938, so women like Stella could do their bit when war was declared. Their roles would vary from things like cooks, clerks and maids to driving lorries and working as mechanics. In fact, they had to be able to maintain and repair most military vehicles. At its peak, the ATS had over 200,000 members, and 6,000 of them were officers, including Stella. The women took part in over 80 military trades and became an essential part of the British war effort. When Stella's sister Gwendolyn died in 2001, the team worked up her family tree in order to track down heirs to her estate. From this, they established that Stella's mother Lillian was one of 6 children. Now they were trying to trace descendants of these children.
Of Lillian's 5 siblings, we established that there was just one sister called Mabel, born in 1889, who married William George Hayden, and she went on to have just one child, a son, William Frederick Hayden.
If Jeremy could find Stella's cousin William, or his descendants, they would be entitled to a share of Stella's estate. Sadly, William had died during the 1990s without any children, so the search moved back to Lillian's brothers. Soon the team uncovered more misfortune. Ernest had died young, in his early 20s, and her youngest brother Sidney died in infancy, aged just 4. Now all their hopes of finding living heirs were pinned on brothers Charles and Frederick. Both did marry, so the team set to work tracing any possible children from these marriages.
On the stem of Frederick, Lillian's brother, we established that there were 8 living descendants on that branch of the family.
One of those descendants was Robert Evans, Frederick's grandson, and Stella's first cousin once removed. It turned out that Robert had been working on his own family tree for many years. As a keen genealogist himself, Robert couldn't quite believe it when the heir hunters came knocking at his door.
You tend to sort of think to yourself, well, I'm not sure if this is real or not, so it was quite a surprise. I've been looking into my family history for 14 years now. Initially, I didn't know anything about Stella at all. Her mother was somebody that the family didn't talk about. You've got to bear in mind that these were people that grew up in the Victorian era, and my Auntie Lillian was regarded by them as being a bit outrageous.
Having children outside of wedlock had distanced Lillian and her daughters from the family, meaning Robert knew very little about their existence.
When I found out that Lillian and Stella were living so close to me, basically, I was a bit upset. I would have liked to have contacted them, found out more about the family.
Robert was one of 8 living descendants of Frederick Evans in line to inherit. But the heir hunters had yet to trace any descendants from Stella's remaining uncle, Charles.
From looking into the stem of Charles, Lillian's brother, we found out that there was actually just one surviving descendant on that branch of the family, and that was Brian Smedley.
Charles Evans married Minnie Gardner in 1904. Their daughter, Mabel Evans, was Stella's first cousin, and her son Brian was now an heir. As the only descendant from one of Stella's uncles, he was actually entitled to half of Stella's estate.
Well, it came completely out of the blue, a complete surprise. It was about 2 years ago, beginning of the year, and a gentleman from Hoopers came and informed us that a relative that I didn't even know at that time died. I didn't realise that Stella existing, and now I find, through going through the family tree, that she's my first cousin removed, who is the sister to my great-grandfather.
Since finding out about Stella, Brian has now been reunited with his long-lost family.
We've been in touch with Bob and Rosie, who are very, very good friends and very likeable people, and hopefully we might get to meet other members of the family in the future, as Bob's got a large repertoire on the family tree.
As well as connecting with new family members, the inheritance itself was another welcome gift for Brian.
We've got a new car which now should last us for the rest of our life, and it also helps with other things that we've had to replace in the house, and makes life a little more easier living.
And being contacted by the heir hunters has given Robert the chance to do some more investigating.
It threw open the doors to find a lot more historical records, and also to bring more information about my great-grandfather Charles Evans.
When he took another look at his family tree, he spotted something about his great-grandfather Charles Evans that immediately struck a chord.
When I found that my great-grandfather had been a bargeman, it was an amazing surprise to me, because I've always been drawn by the water and by the sea. I grew up in Southampton by the water, and always longed to have a boat of my own. And 6 years ago, I purchased a canal narrowboat and explored the inland waterways of England. There was something, I don't know if it's genetic, that made me feel that when I was standing on the back steering it along, that I was home, I'd arrived somewhere. And to find that my great-grandfather was a bargeman and descended in turn from barge families was just an amazing revelation.
With a little more research, Robert soon discovered that his great-grandfather Charles came from a long line of barge captains, who he could trace as far back as the 1700s. Today, he's headed to St Catherine's Dock in London in an effort to find out more about Stella's grandfather Charles. It's a trip that he hopes will bring him closer to Stella and her side of the family.
I discovered that her side of the family had been shunned to some extent because of circumstances, and I feel these days that I want to bring them back in again and research more about them and pay tribute to them and remember them in my family tree.
Robert is meeting Mike Manelli. Mike and his wife Elizabeth bought the Lady Daphne Thames barge in 1996, which they have since lovingly restored. He's an expert in barging history and can shed some light on what life may have been like for a barge captain.
It was a very significant position. You would have to deal with getting crew on board, sorting them out, fares, making sure that the ship was well ballasted, making sure she was loaded properly, keeping accurate track of records. So he would have been very literate and numerate.
So what would his family life have been like? Would he have lived on board the boat all the time or gone ashore occasionally?
It was a very tough life, without question. He would have been away from home quite a bit. He would have had a hard time, probably a stressful time, and would have needed a very understanding wife.
The Thames barge has gradually evolved from the Middle Ages, but its greatest developments have happened during the last 130 years. The boats were versatile because of their flat bottoms, which allowed them to trade far inland and up winding rivers such as the Thames. They've been used on the River Thames since the mid-1800s and are an important part of London's success as a city. At their peak in 1914, more than 2,000 were registered, and they were the workhorse of the rivers.
So physically then, would my great-grandfather have been a very fit and strong guy?
The bargemen then, unlike me, were ferociously strong guys. Whether they were small or large, they were extremely fit and hard-working men throughout their lives, because you're just constantly under physical motion. And then, of course, you would have these extremely long hours as well. He was almost certainly quite an inured, hard man to weather, cold, wind, rain. He would have been quite a character, I suspect. I've had a little look into your grandfather's vessel. It was called the Flower of Kent, registered at 43 tons. She was a very an interesting vessel of her class, very much a Kentish boat, trading therefore quite heavily with London and really feeding London.
The Flower of Kent was built in Finsbury in 1864. Unlike most barges, which were used to deliver hay into the city and take manure out, Charles Evans's boat carried cement until 1932.
Your great-grandfather would have been very, very important to his company, because he would have been the lifeblood of logistics.
So back in those days then, would my great-grandfather have been somebody that I would have liked to have met?
I would have liked to have met him. I don't think there are any people in the barge world I wouldn't like to meet. We have the phrase, you wouldn't touch him with a barge pole. Well, quite the contrary. I'd have liked to have met him. He would have been a man of integrity, because he was handling other people's lives, other people's cargoes. People had to trust him.
It's now clear to see where Robert's own love of the water has come from.
It's been a marvellous journey to come here and see this boat, and now that I've found out what being a Thames barge captain meant, I'm very proud that I've discovered that I've got 3 generations at least of Thames bargemen in my family.
And Robert has used his inheritance to keep this sailing tradition alive.
When I inherited the money, my share of the money, I put it towards various things on my own boat, which really is a tribute to my family. Managed to afford a new licence for it and insured it, and added some accessories and things like that to it. So it's been a very good thing, and it's carried on in the family spirit.